Order. Urgent question. Laura Pidcock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy if she will make a statement on their plans for workers' rights after the UK leaves the EU.
Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Secretary Andrea Leadsom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK has a long and proud tradition of leading the way in workers' rights and for setting the highest standards. The Government has been clear and consistent that the decision to leave the EU does not change that in any way whatsoever. The Government has absolutely no intention of lowering standards on workers' rights. To suggest otherwise is scaremongering and is untrue. The EU traditionally has set minimum standards for workers' rights, and as all colleagues in this chamber would expect, the UK already exceeds standards in a wide range of areas, such as maternity and paternity leave and pay. The UK offers 39 weeks of statutory maternity pay compared with the 14 weeks of paid maternity leave required by the EU's minimum standards. And because this Government believes in the importance of supporting families in every possible way, we've also given fathers and partners an additional statutory right to leave and pay, something that the EU is only now starting to consider. We're one of the few EU member states to have introduced shared parental leave, and we're proud that in the UK we've given all employees with 26 weeks qualifying service a statutory right to request flexible working that enables so many to better balance work and life responsibilities. EU law only allows workers to make such a request if returning from parental leave. So under the terms of the EU Withdrawal Act of 2018, all existing workers' rights laws will be transferred into domestic law once we've left the EU, making sure there is no gap or lack of clarity in the minimum set of workers' rights, which, as I've already said, is something the UK exceeds in many areas. We're also including in the EU Withdrawal Agreement Bill a new requirement that every bill brought before this place in the future that affects workers' rights will include a statement by the government of the day on how it impacts on workers' rights, and this will ensure that Parliament always has its say. The Government has also published clauses that will require every government, now and in the future, to monitor new EU legislation covering employment and workplace health and safety standards, and to report on those changes to Parliament, so that Parliament can again have its say. So, Mr. Speaker, in direct answer to the Honourable Lady's question, I can absolutely assure her and this House that the Government will not lower standards on workers' rights when we leave the EU. On the contrary, it is the ambition of this Government to make the United Kingdom the best place to work and to grow a business.
Thank you for granting this urgent question, Mr. Speaker. I persisted. The leaked memos, as reported in the Financial Times over the weekend, are both worrying and at the same time utterly predictable. They shine a light on the true politics of this Conservative government and how they are seeking to use the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, as with their whole Brexit strategy, to sell out workers. The Prime Minister may keep repeating that this is an excellent deal, and no doubt that will be the mantra come a general election, but I would like to get to the truth. I want to start by asking the Secretary of State about the status of these documents, and in particular ask which government departments they were distributed to and when, and ask at what stage she was aware of their existence and their content, and if she was not aware, why not? Because, Mr. Speaker, this is critical, given that last week the government gave a number of assurances on the issue to members in this House, while at the same time it seems that they were discussing the very opposite amongst themselves. They will use a Brexit as a blueprint for rapid deregulation, which will see the vital flaw on protections disappear. This government have proposed a Brexit deal that benefits their pals, the millionaires, the speculators and hedge fund managers over working people, and they can shout at me all they want, but this is the truth. How can we trust a Prime Minister that stood up and said said they would keep, and I quote, the highest possible standards on workers' rights, yet the leaks show that the government views such commitments as, and I again quote, inappropriate, and that negotiators had successfully resisted them being included in the legally binding part of the agreement with the EU. These rights are not inappropriate. They are things like maternity leave, working hours, paid holiday leave, things that make a difference to people's lives. The Secretary of State says that the government does not intend to dilute rights after we leave the EU. Then can I ask her very simply, why did they take the level playing field obligations out of the legally binding part of the Brexit agreement? Crucially, has the Secretary of State's department or the Cabinet Office ever looked at deregulation, and why have they, if they have? Mr. Speaker, we need to get to the bottom of this. The government are relying on the complexity of this legislation to bury their true approach to workers' rights. Once we expose exactly the consequences of their approach to leaving the EU and what that means for our communities, they know that the government can never win the support of this House, and more importantly, can never win the support of working people. And what is needed is, rather than resisting workers' rights, a fundamental shift in power from the owners of business to workers, and it is only a Labour government that will ever do that.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that was incredibly disappointing. The Honourable Lady obviously wasn't listening to a thing I said. I'll just repeat what I actually said rather than what she asserts I said, if she will allow me. And that is what I said. It is this government's ambition to make the United Kingdom the best place in the world to work. And I find it extraordinary that the Honourable Lady thinks the only valid protector of the UK workers' rights can be the European Union. Why on earth does she think that her party, my party, the other opposition parties and our strong trades union tradition in the United Kingdom are utterly incapable of building on the superb tradition we already have in the United Kingdom of exceeding workers' rights in the EU in so many areas? Once we've left the European Union, the United Kingdom will not be represented in EU institutions, and nor will we have any direct influence on future EU legislation on workers' rights. Why then should the government and this Parliament seek to engineer circumstances where we are required to implement legislation over which we've had no say? As we leave the European Union, we have a unique opportunity to enhance protections for the workforce and tailor them to best support UK workers. It will be for the United Kingdom to create and enhance UK employment rights and to take advantage of the superb opportunities for new UK-wide skills, jobs and prosperity that awaits us after we've left the European Union.
Most eccentric behaviour by the Honourable Gentleman Member for Hitchin and Harpenden. It isn't necessary to raise one's hand as though in a classroom. It's quite sufficient for the Honourable Gentleman simply to stand. I don't know what he did when he was at Eton, but he doesn't have to worry about that now. But anyway, I'm glad there's a beatific smile on the face of the Honourable Gentleman. That itself is a source of some solace. Mr. Ian Duncan Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I say to my right honourable friend that this statement by the other side is completely at odds with reality. If they look very carefully, now wanting to remain in the EU, it is the judgments of the ECJ that Professor Mary Davis of Holloway, a Labour historian, has said would be a thunderclap to the left because they put business rights over workers' rights in imported workers. So if this case is exactly what they said is, they should be wanting to accelerate our departure from the EU to get back full control of workers' rights to the UK.
Yeah. Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, and he's done so much to promote social justice in the United Kingdom, and he deserves respect from all across this place. And what I would say to my right honourable friend is that one of the EU's own agencies, they obviously don't want to hear this because they're all chatting, Mr. Speaker, but one of the EU's own agencies, Eurofound, ranks the United Kingdom as the second best country in the EU for workplace well-being, second only to Sweden, and the best for workplace performance. Something to be proud of.
Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite the Secretary of State's energetic assertions, make no mistake, the Prime Minister's deal is disastrous for workers' rights. Scottish workers and industry now face the spectre of Tory trade deals to lower environmental and other vital standards. The Tories can never be trusted with workers' rights. Their record speaks for itself, and anyone who believes otherwise is sorely deluded. The Prime Minister bought off Labour votes for his awful deal by pledging the highest possible standards. Days later, that promise, like so many others, lay in tatters. The EU law and courts provide their own backstop against UK workers' rights being weakened. We know this government is planning to diverge on key regulations post-Brexit. Isn't it the case that the only way to guarantee workers' rights and avoid them being watered down is to stay in the EU? And as the SCVO pointed out, the loss of oversight from and recourse to the European Court of Justice will remove protection from citizens of the UK. As a minimum, will the Secretary of State at least agree to undertake an equality impact assessment of the UK Government plans for workers' rights post-Brexit? If not, why not?
Well, the honourable gentleman describes my defence of our ambitions on workers' rights as energetic. It also happens to be true, which is extremely helpful to workers in the United Kingdom. And let's just look at the facts, because he asserts that somehow the EU is the only thing that lies between us and the poorhouse. But in reality, there is no minimum wage in the EU, whereas this government is raising the national minimum wage to £10.50 an hour. UK annual holiday entitlement is 28 days, including our public holidays. In the EU, it's 20 days. Our maternity entitlements are nearly 3 times greater than in the EU. We've given fathers and partners statutory right to leave and pay. We've given adoption leave. We've given employees the rights to request flexible working. In every single area, the UK far exceeds the European Union. It's absolute rubbish, total rubbish, to say that the EU is the only protector of UK workers' rights.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could we just turn to the practical for a moment? Most of our constituents are either in work, have worked, or are related to people in work. It would be a pretty eccentric and perverse prospectus to take to our voters to say, please vote for us, we are going to make your working life worse, your standards lower, and your environment less safe. In the practical, non-ideological politics which this side of the House reside in, would my right honourable friend agree with me that would be a very strange political message indeed?
Well, of course, my honourable friend is absolutely right. And just to give some further cheery news, 80% of jobs created since 2010 are full-time jobs. The introduction of the national living wage delivered the lowest earners' fastest pay rise in at least 20 years. The honourable lady might like to look at the facts rather than the rhetoric coming from the opposition benches. If you want to have good work, if you want to have good workers' rights, if you want to have decent wages, stick with the Conservatives.
Angela Eagle.
Speaker, but listening to the Conservative Party and asking them to be trusted is a bit like trusting Dracula with the blood bank. We know what their record is. Now, will the Right Honourable Lady talk about enforcement? Because you can have all the rights you like on paper, but this is a government, and its predecessor government, has slashed enforcement to the bone, which has meant that an awful lot of the so-called rights, theoretical rights that people have at work, don't exist practically.
Yeah, here.
Well, the Right Honourable Lady will know that what she is putting forward there is simply not the case. Since 2015, the government has doubled the budget for enforcement and compliance with the minimum wage. HMRC's enforcement activity has meant 200,000 workers could access nearly 25 million in national minimum wage arrears in 2018-19. The Employment Agency Standard Inspectorate has received a 50% increase in their frontline inspectors. We're investing over £1 billion in reforming the courts and tribunal service. The Right Honourable Lady is asserting non-facts. I'm giving her the facts. She should listen to those.
No. Margaret James.
I welcome my Right Honourable friend's commitment to the UK becoming the best place in the world to work and grow a business. Does she agree with me that we need to consider the way that employment protection and the tribunal system impact on those in low-paid and insecure employment in particular?
Yes, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and she will know that we have consulted on bringing forward proposals on a single enforcement body for employment rights. That consultation closed on the 6th of October, and the government will be responding to that, but she will know very well that this government is committed to extending and improving and enforcing on some of the best workers' rights in the world.
Hear, hear.
I'm going to call a member who cannot be improved in any way. Alison McGovern.
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure how much of a favour you did me there, to be honest.
Live up to the billing.
The truth is that the reality of our labour market today, unfortunately, is the reality that my constituents know, not the picture that we've just heard painted from the dispatch box. But never mind that, Mr. Speaker. This is about Brexit and what it could do to our economy. And the Secretary of State claims the mantle of the person who will defend family rights at work and the ability of people to defend themselves against poor bosses. So will she just clarify for us now? Have the TUC recommended that we accept the government's deal? Yes or no?
Good question.
Yeah.
Well, I think the Honourable Lady will know better than I what the TUC's view is on the government's deal. But she says that the reality is not the same as what I'm saying from the dispatch box. And what I would just like her to recognise, there are almost 32.7 million people more in work now, with 280,000 more in work over the last year. 80% of the jobs since 2010 are full-time, and we have had the fastest growth in real earnings since 2015. The Honourable Lady should listen to the facts and not try to scaremonger. This government is improving workers' rights, we are protecting workers' rights, and we are enhancing enforcement of them.
Michael Fabricant.
Thank you. Anyone who has travelled in the European Union will know that conditions of employment in the UK are higher, particularly on contracts of employment, as well as the other points that my right honourable friend has made. Does she share, therefore, my suspicion that this UQ is not motivated by care for people's and employment rights, but more by the fact that we are facing, possibly, a general election?
Yes. Well, I have to say to my honourable friend, I completely agree, because what I'm hearing from opposition benches does not resemble any of the facts, which are that it is this government, this Conservative government, that is protecting and enhancing rights of the workforce. It is this government that is ensuring a benign economic situation that means more people are in work than ever before, more women in work, fewer young people out of work, rises in wages, and ensuring employment is safer, more secure, and health and safety rules are strong. And it's the opposition that seems to be positioning itself for a general election.
Chris Williamson.
The Secretary of State, if she's serious about making Britain the best place in the world to work, could I suggest that she comes to the dispatch box now and commits to scrapping the anti-trade union legislation, because undermining trade unions over the last 10 years or so has led to an explosion of precarious, low-paid employment, which is now endemic throughout the land.
Well, what the honourable gentleman will be aware of is that in leaving the European Union and with the withdrawal agreement that the Prime Minister has negotiated, it will be the case that if there are any changes to workers' rights, to employment legislation made in the European Union, then there will be the facility for the government to consult with businesses and with trade unions, and for this House to express its own view on any changes and to whether those could or should be considered for implementation in the UK. But what's really important is that it's this House and the United Kingdom's courts that should be able to judge and measure on whether we are sticking to our commitment, as any government, today or a future government, to maintaining the highest standards of workers' rights.
Easy.